evening and welcome to Faith Nation. Thanks for joining us for this special program featuring stories on some of the biggest social issues facing America. From CBN's headquarters in Virginia Beach, I'm Wendy Griffith. Well, the abortion debate has sparked new arguments over in vitro fertilization. A majority of Americans support the practice that helps childless couples conceive. Others are divided on the morality of a procedure which involves the destruction of frozen embryos. Charlene Aaron has more on a possible solution where everyone wins.
Millions of couples deal with infertility, and more are turning to science in the hope of growing their families. The latest U.S. statistics show that in 2021, in vitro fertilization resulted in the births of more than 86,000, or 2% of babies nationwide. Amidst growing debate over IVF, a lesser-known option called embryo adoption is also gaining ground. For 10 years, Rodney and Mary Leah Miller struggled to have a family.
Attempt after attempt, negative pregnancy test after negative pregnancy test, you begin to wonder, will this ever happen for us?
That question led the Alabama couple to undergo several rounds of in vitro fertilization, which all failed. Then in May of 2020, friends told them about embryo adoption, a process which involves a woman receiving one or several donated frozen embryos.
We both just had a peace about us, and we're very confident that this is how the Lord was going to start our family.
The Millers connected with the Snowflake program, which helps people with embryos in frozen storage to offer them for adoption. While their first try resulted in miscarriage, the second proved doubly successful. 2 years ago, twins Dalton and Mary Elizabeth, who had been frozen for 10 years, were born via C-section.
To see that promise realized on December 23rd, 2022 was, it was truly a miracle, but also just representative of God's faithfulness.
Concerns about this technology have moved to the forefront this year, especially over the large number of embryos which may never be implanted. In February, the Alabama Supreme Court ignited the debate by ruling frozen embryos created during IVF to be children. Then, during its annual meeting in June, the Southern Baptist Convention passed a resolution expressing compassion for couples faced with infertility, as well as moral caution for the procedure. Ethicist Jason Thacker advised the SBC on the matter.
We're not condemning the practice outright, but we're saying we must kind of think cautiously and cultivate wisdom for how we navigate these devastating realities.
Nightlight Christian Adoption Agency, home to the Snowflake program, estimates more than 1.5 million embryos remain in frozen storage nationwide. CBN News asked Beth Button, the program's executive director, about the possibility of finding adoptive families for all those embryos.
It really depends on how many of those embryos end up being donated for adoption. So many of the embryos that are in frozen storage, the family who created them could potentially be still planning to use them at a later point for reproduction.
Budden says many who support embryo adoption are unaware of what's involved in the practice.
And unfortunately, it's just part of the everyday practice of in vitro fertilization that embryos are discarded.
Ethical issues that can be difficult, especially for many Christians.
We faced them and made very difficult decisions with our very first specialist that we spoke with on the number of embryos that we were willing to fertilize and that we wouldn't be discarding.
Thacker sees the widespread acceptance of in vitro fertilization as the next stance in the fight for the unborn. A recent Gallup poll found that 82% believe IVF to be morally acceptable. 10% view the procedure as morally wrong, with the remainder expressing no opinion. And when it comes to destroying frozen embryos created by in vitro fertilization, 49% believe it is moral to do so, while 43% disagree.
What we're seeing not only in the state of Alabama, but other states rushing to kind of usher in protections for IVF, access to IVF. We see the push at the federal level to federalize access to IVF.
Meanwhile, the Millers are grateful for their growing family, as they're expecting a second set of twins later this year.
look at these beautiful blessings the Lord has given us, we spend our time thanking him for the science and everything that he has provided to make this possible.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
In Texas, state abortion restrictions are leading some women on the border to look for other options. CBN's Heather Sells reports on one pro-life ministry in Eagle Pass that's offering an alternative.
There is a high-stakes battle for the lives of unborn children here in Eagle Pass, Texas. And that is because women here can easily go across the border into Mexico and obtain an abortion.
They offer the pill and other types of abortion just right across the river. And so if someone wants to, they can seek that out.
While the issue of migrants flooding the border to get into the U.S. is well known, Americans may be unaware of pregnant women crossing into Mexico for an abortion that is legal and typically low cost.
They can just go quite easily and then come back without really knowing the consequences of those actions or not really having the support.
3 years ago, Texas passed the heartbeat law banning abortions after 6 weeks. A week later, the Mexican Supreme Court decriminalized abortion. Latin American abortion advocates, known as the Green Wave, now offer abortions in Mexico to women coming from the U.S. They can find clinics in tourist destinations like Cancun and right across the Rio Grande. In addition to these clinics, women in Eagle Pass can also choose to obtain abortion pills by mail. It's one reason why missionary Amy Crabtree and believers here started Promise Family Services.
We are the only pregnancy resource center here in Eagle Pass. The closest one is about an hour away.
The center provides free pregnancy testing, counseling for pregnant women who may consider abortion, and coaching for those who have endured sexual abuse, a miscarriage, or abortion.
A lot of times, these sexually related traumas accompany one another. It's usually not just one. And so our heart is to see women and their families healed and restored in all areas of their life.
Walking alongside women navigating trauma or pregnancy is the heartbeat of this fledgling ministry.
And I love doing it. It's awesome, the work, to be able to be with a woman who's going to have her baby and support her and love on her. And that's just a real practical way that I can show God's love.
That love can be seen in free baby showers, a very tangible show of support for about-to-be moms who have said yes to life. No one knows just how many women are obtaining abortions in Mexico or buying pills online. What is clear is that they're easily accessible, especially along the border. That makes relational encouragement, like these showers and Promise Family Services, all the more important in the fight to protect life. Reporting in Eagle Pass, Texas, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Gender identity and the church. Resources to help Christian parents navigate the nation's hot topic issue. Stay tuned. With gender identity becoming one of the country's most talked about issues, the church is wrestling with how to respond. But for Christian parents with kids questioning their gender, resources are limited. Paul Petit reports on some of the help that is out there.
This is Jonathan West, who is now Jenna.
It came from nowhere.
Even in Christian homes like Melinda's, gender identity and transitioning is surging.
My son was gone, and this person in front of me was going to be changing, and it wasn't the person I knew.
Long hair, nails, hormone therapy, all part of Jonathan's transition process.
They went in and they took 2 inches off of each side of his collarbone, and they closed those together so that his shoulders would not be so broad.
Melinda can't figure out how she missed it. She says Jonathan grew up as a typical boy, playing baseball and attending youth group.
We really struggled on how to, as Christian parents, address this.
Jean and Anita Eggman are helping parents like Melinda. The couple leads a Christian support group at Cross Church in Springdale, Arkansas. Created to guide parents with same-sex attracted children, 40% of the group now includes parents of those who identify as trans.
And it's basically helping parents navigate through all this, maintaining their faith, and being able to stand on the Word of God, but also show the love of God to their loved ones.
What we have seen, it's very unusual that someone reaches out for a support group right away. A lot of times they just try to work through it by themselves.
About Hope is part of the National Hope Restorative Network. Gina and Anita's group meet confidentially every week in this room. Many join online from across the nation, and all of them are given the same tools, now helping Melinda deal with her transitioning son.
When she first came to us, within the first few weeks, we were going through boundaries, creating healthy boundaries. And I remember her saying, I don't think I have any healthy boundaries. I don't have any boundaries.
An online resource for parents is called parentsofrogdkids.com. ROGD stands for Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria.
I would say that every parent goes through, like, what did I do wrong? I certainly did.
Started in 2017, the organization now has 3,000 members worldwide. It offers information to also help parents screen therapists who will not simply affirm their child's gender dysphoria.
If you go to a gender therapist and they say, I'm confused, and they say, well, you're trans, and your problem is because your parents don't affirm you. Okay, well, that's just bad therapy.
Melinda's support group has taught her what she's up against and how to navigate her relationship with Jonathan.
What we see now is that how strong she's gotten, and
That's awesome.
She has learned it's okay to say no.
He won't receive gifts from me because I won't buy him anything pink.
In a culture that celebrates the transgender movement, this can be an uphill battle for parents. Through proper support, however, people like Melinda are learning to cope and trust.
They can't change them. And so in their Christian faith, they have to fall back on that the Lord is the only one that can really change somebody.
I am hoping and praying that as he learns who he is, he will learn who he is through Christ.
In Arkansas, Paul Petit, CBN News.
For parents concerned about their kids, experts recommend looking for big changes in their personality. They also say to keep tabs on your child's friend group, as well as their social media and other online activities. And for more information and resources, you can visit our website, cbnnews.com. Well, the battle over transgender procedures for minors when Faith Nation returns. Here in America, states are battling over the issue of restricting gender transition procedures for kids. This year, the UK's National Health Service will no longer prescribe puberty-blocking drugs for children. Here again is Charlene Aaron with this report on the impact it could have here in the U.S.
The UK decision banning puberty blockers for children followed an independent review, citing safety concerns and limited research on long-term effects. The National Health Service concluded there is not enough evidence to support the safety or clinical effectiveness of puberty-suppressing hormones to make the treatment routinely available at this time. Former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss applauding the ban.
I'm delighted that the Health Service is now saying that no under 18s can be prescribed these drugs.
Here in the U.S., a recent study shows nearly 20% of all people identifying as transgender are aged 13 to 17. That's close to 300,000. The number of kids known to be on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones has more than doubled in 4 years, from close to 2,400 in 2017 to more than 5,000 in 2021. Sarah Parshall-Perry of the Heritage Foundation blames gender ideology for fueling the rise.
We're seeing this increase because young people are vulnerable to the impacts of peer pressure, social media, cultural elites, and again, what they are hearing from their commander-in-chief and the individuals in positions of power in this country.
Effects are linked to poor mental health among children struggling with gender confusion. Research also found that 34% of trans youth have experienced a decline in mental health while taking the drugs. Physicians say major concerns include risk of sterility, lifelong dependence on medication, and anguish of regret. Nathaniel Blake of the Ethics and Public Policy Center.
They are experimenting on children with no real understanding of what they're doing. With regard to sterility, that is a real problem, and that is inevitable for some of these treatment pathways.
More than 20 Republican-led states have adopted laws restricting medical intervention for children with gender dysphoria.
We've seen many of these bans enacted at the state level, 23 bans for procedures, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers for minors under the age of 18. My hope now is that this will encourage more states to pass bans for these procedures under the age of 18 in their states.
Back in Europe, more countries such as Norway, Finland, and Sweden are following the UK's lead. And Blake is hoping that trend soon includes the U.S.
I think it will happen. I don't think that it will be quite the same as in the UK, but I think all it may take will be one or two big lawsuits winning. And if there are major damages awarded to some of the people who have been hurt by gender transition, that might break the industry, which has simply been able to profit off of injuring people and has not yet been held accountable for that.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Coming up, what did the Founding Fathers really mean by the separation of church and state? We'll deconstruct that proverbial wall next. When Thomas Jefferson wrote of a wall of separation between church and state, he meant that government can't tell Americans to worship or how to worship. Today, some say Jefferson's phrase has been twisted to prevent Americans from practicing their faith. As Paul Strand reports, the wall of separation was never intended to mean government versus God.
The phrase wall of separation between church and state has come to mean keeping God or his believers from having a big effect on government and public life. But that's not at all what the Founding Fathers were thinking about when they were separating church and state.
They were afraid of what so many of the old world countries had, a religion established by the state as its one true religion that would tyrannically rule over the faith and conscience of every citizen. For as the Providence Forum's Peter Lilback puts it,
they recognized having a monolithic church was a dangerous thing.
Because it made the king not only their physical sovereign, but all-powerful spiritual ruler. Before the Pilgrims fled England,
the Pilgrims' pastor was executed because he made the statement that Jesus Christ is head of the church. And the monarch leader, no, I'm head of the church, you're dead.
American Minute historian William Federer.
Now, their big fear was the federal government was going to follow the blueprint of every country in Europe and pick one national denomination.
Consciously, therefore, they were separating the church from government.
But that was strictly to protect the churches and each believer's faith and conscience from the government. That's what Christian historian Eddie Hyatt says Thomas Jefferson was talking about when he wrote the letter that first used the famous phrase.
He said that the First Amendment had erected a wall of separation that would protect them from any intrusion of the government.
But the idea of God, he's on both sides of the wall, and he's welcome there, and he should be.
But today, a complete flip.
Those who once believed in this really high and impregnable wall of church and state, we now see the government reaching over that wall and saying, but don't preach that text of the Scripture.
All of a sudden, the government's regulating religious activities, which is what Jefferson said they would not do because of separation of church and state.
The founders would be so distressed to see how that statement has been turned on its head.
Lilback says we have to remember what our founders intended.
This is a theistic government, so God was not separated from government. So any interpretation of the First Amendment that takes God out of government is turning the whole story on its head.
Because the founders believed a nation founded on liberty could only stay free if its citizens were godly people.
As wall builder David Barton points out, believers in God have their eyes on eternity, and it makes them practice self-control.
When you're God conscious, you realize, I'm going to have to answer to Him for what I do, and it limits my bad behavior.
They were creating a nation for a free people, but also for a virtuous people who would govern themselves from within according to Christian values.
And the founders knew they also needed the perfect law of a loving, all-wise God.
There was a clear understanding that the government needed to have an ultimate check and balance even beyond the people that ran it in their elections, and that is the transcendent law of God. And so that is why when we look at our Declaration of Independence, there are 4 references to deity.
But then came the U.S. Constitution, which some say is a godless document because God isn't mentioned in it. But as soon as they were finished with it, the founders called for a day of thanksgiving to God.
Now, if their intent was to get rid of God from government, boy, did they miss their point, because they turned around and thanked Him for everything that they had, which shows the utter historical absurdity of the godless Constitution.
And God isn't really absent from the Constitution or its authors' lives.
They are not godless. They are, in fact, people at the end of their very work. They said, in the year of our Lord, 1787. The last words of the Constitution are reference to Jesus Christ. It's no surprise then that the ultimate motto is, we are one nation under God.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Great story. Thanks, Paul. Well, that is going to do it for Faith Nation. Have a great night, and God bless you.